de la durée des films. Très souvent, on entend dire que les films que tu vois sont trop courts, qui serait mieux plus long. Toi-même, tu as fait souvent des films très longs. Donc tu tiens cette idée de longueur.
J'ai l'impression que il y avait un art dans les films d'il y a 50 ans, effectivement, de la brièveté, de la condensation des événements, des idées, qui est vertigineux quand on revoit ces films-là et qui a été complètement perdu. Parce que bon, il y a des époques pour toutes les choses. Parce qu'on est passé, je crois, comme le dirait Deleuze, dans une époque je le dirais beaucoup mieux que moi, mais où le temps n'est plus... n'a plus la même vitesse, c'est pas la même densité, ni le même tempo, comme s'il y avait un avant Antonioni et après Antonioni qui a... Bon, je dis Antonioni, il n'est pas le seul, mais il a été effectivement un des cinéastes qui ont très fortement marqué cet infléchissement de la durée. Et que maintenant, dans les durées des fictions contemporaines, il faut 3 heures, là où il en fallait une il y a 50 ans.
Mais 3 heures pour raconter la même histoire ou pour raconter une histoire? Pour réussir à raconter une histoire?
Pas la même histoire,
pas la même.
Pas la même histoire.
In my book, The Parallax View, I developed more in detail. I will just mention it here. The wonderful example which I found in a biography of Niels Bohr, you know, of Copenhagen quantum physics. Niels Bohr, incidentally, was also the guy who, I think, provided a wonderful right answer to Einstein. You know that Einstein's well-known phrase which reflects his distrust in quantum physics, God doesn't play dice. Everybody knows this. But you know what was Niels Bohr's answer? Don't tell God what to do. I mean, it's the correct. Okay, this is even a more beautiful story. A friend visited Niels Bohr in a countryside house and noticed above the entrance door a horseshoe. In Europe, I don't know how it is here, a horseshoe is a kind of a superstitious item. If you put it above the entrance, it is supposed to keep out the evil spirits and so on, keep the house safe, whatever. Now, the friend was shocked and addressed Niels Bohr, "My God, I thought you are a scientist. Do you believe in this kind of superstitious crap?" Niels Bohr answered, "No, of course not. I'm not crazy." Then the other guy says, "But why is it there then?" Here, Niels Bohr gave the correct answer. Not the usual boring, fake, multiculturalist, tolerant one that we like today. It's just our way of life. It is out of respect for and so on. No, I know this story. All my Jewish friends, they don't believe in kosher food, but they don't eat pork out of respect for and so on. No, and you get here wonderful paradoxes. I mean, I'm not focusing on Jews. With Arabs, it's the same with us Christians. I'm saying because I know the situation there. No, like a typical Jew, of course, doesn't believe in God, but nonetheless he believes that God gave them the land of Israel, that they can have it. That's another story, you know. But what I want to say is, so what is then the answer, not this politically correct, of Niels Bohr? Why do you have it? It's a wonderful one. He answered, of course I don't believe in it, but I have it there because I was told that it works even if you don't believe in it. That's ideology today. You don't have to believe in democracy. You practice it, and your beliefs are
activity that mass and energy are both quite different manifestations of the same thing. A somewhat unfamiliar conception for the average mind.
On this, do you know the book
I found a book, the guy then wrote many books, Brian Victoria, Zen at War. It's a shocking book, especially horrible for many so-called anti-Eurocentrists who claim our monotheism is guilty of everything, we need Oriental. Yeah, but that book is about apart from a couple of exceptions, the behavior of Zen Buddhist community in Japan in the 30s, early 40s. Not only they totally supported Japanese expansion into China, they even provided properly Zen Buddhist justification for it. For example, the one, you know who did this? No, you are not as old as me, I remember him, D.T. Suzuki, the great yeah, but okay, he was doing this in the 60s, but as a younger guy, he was fully supporting Japanese militarism, and one of his justifications was this one, the advice of Japanese military to them to support Zen Buddhist training. Because he says, it's one of the most horrifying things that I've ever read, he said, sorry, don't take it personally, but let's say an officer orders me, if I were to tell this to you, it would be too obvious, so I pick you, I have to kill you, stab you with my knife. And he says, if I remain in this illusionary self, then I feel responsible, I kill you. But he says, if you are enlightened by Zen Buddhism, then you know there is no substantial reality, you become a neutral observer of your life, just a flow of phenomena, and you tell yourself, it's not that I'm killing you, but in the cosmic dance of phenomena, my knife is floating and somehow your knife false. You know what I'm saying? This, I'm not disputing some spiritual greatness of Zen Buddhism. I'm saying how even the most enlightened this spiritual experience can serve a terrible cause.